The Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Confederation was a testament to 1 billion years of peace sculpted into existence. Its ceiling was a living star map, a slow, majestic swirl of nebulae and captured suns that bathed the chamber in a perpetual, holy twilight. Tiers of polished obsidian rose from a central floor of milky quartz, each alcove occupied by a being whose form defied simple biology. There were the glyptons, crystalline sentinels, whose facets shivered with the ambient emotional resonance of the hall. The Orfu, a collective consciousness that manifested as a shimmering, scented cloud of intelligent gas contained within a humming force field. And presiding over all from the highest dais were the Lyrans, ancient, wraith-like beings of immense telepathic power, their slender forms draped in robes that seemed woven from spacetime itself. For 3 standard centuries, this hall had buzzed with a singular, unifying myth: the imminent arrival of the solitaries. Humanity, they were a legend long before they were a reality. Their radio signals, the first evidence of their existence, had been a baffling paradox. Crude, chaotic, yet filled with an astonishing artistic and mathematical complexity. A single transmission could contain a brutal war epic, followed by a symphony of such heartbreaking beauty that the Glyptons had resonated with sorrow for a full cycle. They broadcasted their greatest triumphs and their most shameful atrocities with equal vigor, a species seemingly at war with itself, yet capable of profound unity and love. The Lyrans, peering across the void with their vast mental abilities, could only sense a riot of uncontrolled, powerful psychic noise, a beacon of untamed consciousness. The Confederation, a coalition built on the principles of mutual support and the peaceful integration of sentient life, had dispatched expedition after expedition. Their member species had, for the most part, evolved along predictable lines. They were herbivores, filter feeders, photosynthesizers, or at their most aggressive, territorial omnivores. They had achieved sentience through cooperation, social complexity, or intellectual prowess that allowed them to circumvent the messy, brutal business of predation. They had no true concept of a species that had clawed its way to the top of its world's food chain not through size or strength, but through cunning, endurance, and a terrifying, collaborative lethality. To them, a predator was a mindless beast, a planetary obstacle to be managed, not a potential partner in galactic discourse. They expected the solitaries to be titans, beings of immense physical power to match their turbulent spirit. Or perhaps ethereal intellectuals who had conquered their baser instincts through sheer mental force. The myths grew with every failed expedition, every new confounding signal. Today, the myth was to become manifest. The great portal at the base of the hall, a ring of liquid metal that had not shimmered open in 50 years, dilated. A hush fell, thick with the weight of generations of anticipation. The Glyptons' facets glowed with a soft, expectant gold. The Orfu's gaseous forms swirled into intricate patterns of welcome. High Counselor Xyla, eldest of the Lyrans, focused his ancient mind, ready to extend the first official telepathic greeting in the history of 2 peoples. Through the shimmering portal stepped Elias Vance, first ambassador of the Terran Systems Alliance, and the collective breath of a galaxy was held in utter, profound disappointment. He was small, frail even, a biped of unimpressive stature, covered not in natural armor or gleaming cybernetics, but in a sheath of dark, woven fibers. His skin was soft and pinkish, his head topped with a spray of dark hair already receding from his brow. He had no visible claws, no fangs, no carapace. His hands, with their 5 delicate digits, seemed better suited for manipulating tools than for combat. 2 eyes, set forward in his face, blinked slowly, taking in the impossible grandeur of the hall. Shimmer of 9 facets, the Glypton delegate, felt the wave of anticlimax wash through the chamber. Its own crystalline structure, usually resonating with powerful emotions, picked up only a faint, low hum from the human. It was not the majestic chord of a titan, nor the complex symphony of a genius. It was a muted, controlled thrum of anxiety. No, that wasn't right. It was something else, something carefully banked and contained. A guarded stillness. From a higher tier, Warlord Kalen of the Vrax snorted, a harsh, guttural sound that echoed in the sudden silence. The Vrax were a species of hulking, insectoid warriors, their crimson exoskeletons gleaming under the starlight ceiling. They had been brought into the Confederation through conquest and submission, and they valued only one thing: strength. Kalen saw the human and felt a deep, instinctual contempt. This was the creature the mystics had whispered about, this soft, pathetic specimen. It looked like prey. It smelled of organic weakness. "It is small," Kalen sub-vocalized to his aide, the clicking of his mandibles sharp with disdain. "The Lyrans have wasted centuries chasing a child's tail. This creature would not survive a season on Vraxes." High Counselor Xyla ignored the Vrax's rudeness. He extended a gentle, probing tendril of thought toward the human ambassador. "Welcome, child of Sol. We are the Confederation. We have awaited you for a long time." The response was not telepathic. It came from Vance's mouth, translated by a small, discreet device on his collar into the Confederation's lingua franca, a series of melodic clicks and resonant hums. "High Counselor Xyla, on behalf of a unified Earth and its allied worlds, I thank you for this welcome. It is an honor beyond measure to stand in this hall." His voice was even, calm, betraying none of the awe or fear a lesser being might feel. Xyla noted this with a flicker of interest. The human's mind was shielded, not with the crude psychic barriers of a paranoid species, but with a form of disciplined self-control that was utterly alien. It was like a placid lake, and Xyla's powerful mind could not perceive the depths beneath. He could sense the surface thoughts, diplomatic protocols, prepared statements, a checklist of objectives, but the core of the man, the essence of his species, was a closed door. "Journey was long." The High Counselor's voice resonated through the hall, a sound like chimes in a gentle wind. "You are the first, a great burden and a great honor. The Confederation offers you rest, sustenance, and the wisdom of our collective experience. We understand your species is young, still grappling with its own tumultuous nature. We are here to guide you." The tone was unmistakably patronizing. The offer of guidance was what they extended to pre-warp societies, to fledgling species who had just left their planetary cradles. Elias Vance inclined his head, a gesture of polite deference. "We are grateful for your offer, High Counselor. Humanity has indeed had a challenging history. We have learned much from it. We come to you now not as children seeking guidance, but as peers seeking partnership." A low murmur rippled through the assembly. The Glyptons shimmered with a confused pale blue. Peers? This fragile creature, representing a species that still broadcasted its internal squabbles across the galaxy, considered itself a peer to the billion-year-old Confederation. The sheer audacity was almost amusing. Kalen of the Vrax laughed openly this time, a grating boom that made Vance flinch almost imperceptibly. "Peers? You have no fleet to speak of. Your worlds are clustered in a single arm of the galaxy, and you stand before us with no armor and no weapon. What currency do you bring to this negotiation, little human? Hope? Pleasantries?" Vance's eyes, a flat, unassuming shade of brown, moved from the High Counselor to the Vrax warlord. He didn't puff out his chest or raise his voice. He simply met the warlord's gaze. "We bring ourselves, Warlord Kalen. We believe that is more than enough." Simplicity of the statement, delivered without a trace of arrogance or fear, was unsettling. It was not the response of prey. Prey would stammer or posture defensively or appeal to the higher authority of the council. Vance did none of these things. He stood his ground, a small, soft figure in a hall of giants, and made a claim of worth that was, by all evidence, utterly baseless. Xyla felt a prickle of something new. It wasn't disappointment anymore. It was curiosity, tinged with a faint, unidentifiable disquiet. He had sensed the minds of 1,000 species. The fear of the hunted, the arrogance of the strong, the placid contentment of the herbivorous. This was different. The human's mind was a fortress of quiet, deliberate thought. And for the first time, Xyla began to wonder not what lay beneath the surface of that placid lake, but why the walls containing it were built so very, very high. The first day of proceedings ended with humanity being formally acknowledged, but categorized as a protectorate candidate species, a title that was both an honor and an insult. They were in, but at the children's table. Elias Vance accepted the designation with a gracious nod, his composure unwavering, and retired to the quarters assigned to him, leaving the grand hall to buzz with speculation and dismissive condescension. The myth of the solitaries was dead. In its place was the reality of a soft, unassuming biped with an inflated sense of self-importance. The galaxy, it seemed, had nothing to fear. The following sessions established a pattern. The Confederation Council, led by the gentle but firm hand of High Counselor Xyla, laid out their terms for humanity's integration. They offered advanced medical technology to cure the diseases that still plagued human populations. They offered cleaner energy sources to heal their damaged homeworld. They offered navigational charts to the safer, more stable regions of the galaxy. In return, they asked for little: adherence to Confederation law, a cessation of all internal armed conflicts, and the decommissioning of their primitive but troubling nuclear arsenal. It was, on the surface, an incredibly generous offer. To Elias Vance, it felt like being fitted for a golden collar. Each offer of aid was a subtle reinforcement of their perceived superiority and humanity's perceived helplessness. He politely countered each point, not with refusal, but with proposals for exchange rather than charity. Your medical sciences are indeed centuries ahead of our own, honored delegates, Vance would say, his voice a steady drone in the vast hall. We would be honored to share in that knowledge. In exchange, perhaps our own unique biology could be of interest. We have a remarkably adaptive immune system, born of a world teeming with microbial life that you would likely find horrifically aggressive. Our capacity for rapid healing and physiological adaptation under extreme duress is, we are told, unusual. Council would listen, the Lyran delegates nodding with placid indulgence, while others, like the Vrax, barely contained their scorn. Shimmer of Nine Facets felt the emotional tenor of his words. They were not boastful. They were statements of fact, delivered with the dry precision of a scientist listing attributes. There was a confidence there that seemed disconnected from the frail form that spoke them. The tension truly began to escalate when the topic turned to galactic territory. The Confederation proposed a quarantine zone around the Sol system and its nearby colonies. For your own protection, Xyla explained, his telepathic voice soothing and reasonable. There are dangers in the void, Ambassador, unaffiliated marauders, spatial anomalies, predatory fauna on unclaimed worlds. It is our duty to ensure your species is not exposed to such threats before you are ready. This was the point where Warlord Kalen could no longer contain himself. He rose from his tier, his massive form eclipsing the starlight from the ceiling. His voice, a bass rumble that vibrated through the quartz floor, needed no translation. Protection. You speak of protection for them, High Counselor, when they are the contamination. They have spread from their world of origin like a blight, strip mining their own system for resources, their history a litany of self-inflicted wounds. Now they come to us, hands outstretched, asking to be saved from the consequences of their own nature. I say we do not quarantine them for their protection. We quarantine them for ours. Several delegations murmured in agreement. The idea of humanity's chaotic, violent nature being unleashed upon the stable, ordered galaxy was a genuine fear for many. They had seen the historical records humanity had provided, a gesture of transparent goodwill that was now being used as a weapon against them. World wars, genocides, ecological collapse. It was a horrifying resume. Elias Vance turned slowly to face the towering Vrax warlord. He did not crane his neck to look up at the giant. Instead, he kept his posture relaxed, his gaze directed at the warlord's center of mass. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible shift, but to a student of combat, it was significant. Warlord Kalen's concerns are understandable, Vance said, his voice remaining level. Humanity is, as I have stated, a species with a difficult past. We do not hide from it. But every scar we bear is a lesson learned. Our expansion was not born of a desire to contaminate, but of a biological imperative to survive. Our homeworld is competitive. Kalen laughed, a harsh, clattering sound. Competitive? What does a creature like you know of competition? On Vraxes, the young hatch and must immediately fight for their first meal, often against their own siblings. The weak are consumed, the strong endure. That is competition. Your people coddle your weak, heal your sick, and prolong the lives of the useless. You are not competitors, you are parasites. Warlord began to descend from his tier, his heavy footfalls echoing like drumbeats of doom. The assembly guards, ceremonial figures from a species of peaceful, six-limbed insectoids, shifted nervously but did not intervene. This was a political confrontation, not yet a physical one. You speak of survival, Kalen boomed, stalking onto the central floor, his shadow falling over the small human. He was now less than 10 feet away. You have survived because you were alone, isolated in your forgotten corner of the cosmos. Here, among true powers, your weakness will be your undoing. High Counselor Xyla felt a spike of alarm. This was a dangerous breach of protocol. Warlord Kalen, that is enough. The ambassador is a guest of the council, but Kalen was consumed by his own righteous contempt. He was a warrior. He saw weakness, and his very being recoiled from it, demanding it be exposed and purged. He stopped directly in front of Vance, close enough that the human had to tilt his head back slightly to see the warlord's snarling mandibles. "Look at you," Kalen spat, his breath a foul, acrid stench. "No exoskeleton, no natural weapons. Your eyes are flat, dull. I see no fire, no warrior's spirit. I see only the fear of a herbivore that has wandered into the predator's den." This was the moment everyone was watching. Shimmer of Nine Facets pulsed with a frantic, agitated light. It felt the collective anxiety of the hall, the fear of the guards, the anger of the Vrax. But from the human, it felt nothing. The quiet, banked hum was gone. In its place was a stillness so profound, so absolute, it was like a hole in the emotional spectrum. It was the calm of a vacuum. Xyla focused his telepathic senses on Vance, trying to push past the formidable mental discipline. He needed to assess the human state to prevent a diplomatic incident. He pushed, and for a moment, the placid surface of the lake rippled. He did not see into Vance's thoughts. He saw, for a nanosecond, what lay beneath the lakebed. It was not a foundation of reason or philosophy. It was a bedrock of primal, ancient history, not Vance's history, the history of his genes. Xyla was plunged into a sensory flash so vivid it made his ethereal form recoil. He saw a sun-drenched savanna, tall grass hiding death. He felt the gnawing ache of an empty stomach, the burning in the lungs of a chase that lasted not minutes, but hours, days. He felt the desperate cunning of the cornered prey that turns the tables, the intelligence that learns to use a sharp rock, then a sharpened stick, then a thrown spear. He felt the moment, millions of years in the making, when the hunted looked back at the hunter not with fear, but with assessment. The moment the prey began to hunt the hunter. It was a history of being both. Of being stalked by cave bears and saber-toothed cats in the terrifying dark, while simultaneously learning to become the most ruthlessly efficient, cooperative pack hunter the planet had ever known. Humanity hadn't evolved in spite of predators. They had evolved to out-predator the predators. They were not herbivores who had learned to think. They were persistence hunters who had used their terrifying stamina and cunning to exhaust and kill creatures 10 times their size. They were omnivores who had mastered every environment on their planet, from the frozen poles to the scorching deserts, leaving a trail of extinguished megafauna in their wake. Xyla staggered back in the telepathic space, his mind reeling from the sheer, blood-minded tenacity of it all. The Confederation had species that were strong, species that were smart, species that were cooperative. They had never encountered a species that was all three, forged in the crucible of a world where for 1,000,000 years, they were both the monster in the dark and the one huddled around the fire in fear of it. Meanwhile, in the physical world, the Orfu Collective, monitoring the hall's biological sensors, noted a series of anomalies in the human ambassador. His heart rate, which should have been skyrocketing in the face of the Vrax's intimidation, had dropped. It was now a slow, steady, powerful beat. His body temperature remained constant. His pupils had dilated slightly, not in fear, but to gather more light, more information. His weight had shifted onto the balls of his feet, his posture subtly coiled. These were not the physiological responses of a frightened diplomat. They were the responses of a predator preparing for engagement. Vance's voice, when he finally spoke, was so quiet it was almost a whisper, yet it cut through the warlord's tirade like a shard of obsidian. "You see weakness, warlord, because that is what you want to see. You are a creature of strength and instinct. You see a lack of carapace and assume fragility. You see a lack of claws and assume helplessness. Your senses are attuned to the threats of your world. You are not equipped to recognize the threats of mine." Leaned down further, his multifaceted eyes boring into Vance's. "And what threat is that, little man?" The threat of tedious speeches. This was the critical moment, the point of no return. Kalen, in a gesture of ultimate dismissal, raised his huge, three-clawed hand. He didn't intend to strike. He intended to shove Vance aside, to push him to the floor like a misbehaving child. It was an act of physical dominance designed to utterly humiliate him and his species. The hand moved, and Elias Vance did not move a muscle. He did not flinch, he did not raise his arms to block. He simply held the warlord's gaze. But the man, the diplomat, the carefully constructed persona of Elias Vance, vanished. For one horrifying second, the thing that wore his skin looked out through his eyes. The change was not physical. It was a shift in the very essence of his being, and it was so profound that it sent a shockwave through the hall. High Counselor Xyla, still reeling from the ancestral memories, felt the dam of Vance's mental control shatter. He was flooded not with thoughts, but with pure, unadulterated instinct, a billion years of evolutionary imperative honed to a razor's edge. It was the cold, calculating geometry of the kill. Neck, artery beneath the chitin joint. Eyes, soft tissue. Knee joint, side impact, unbalance. 3 seconds to cripple, 5 to kill. The thoughts weren't even words. They were a torrent of strategic, predatory targeting data overlaid with a terrifying, profound calm. An absolute certainty. There was no anger, no malice. Only the pure, clean, lethal purpose of an apex predator assessing its prey. Xyla broadcasted a silent, telepathic scream that ripped through the minds of every Lyran in the hall, a wave of pure, primal terror. Shimmer of 9 facets, the Glypton empath, was hit by the emotional equivalent. The vacuum of stillness that had surrounded the human exploded. It was not an emotion in any recognizable sense. It was the psychic manifestation of intent. It was the feeling of a landslide just before it gives way, of the silent pressure drop before a world-shattering storm. It was the focused will of a being that looked at the universe and saw not wonders or threats, but obstacles, resources, and meat. The Glypton's crystalline form vibrated violently, emitting a high-pitched shriek of sympathetic dread as cracks began to form along its facets. Across the hall, every being with even a trace of empathic or telepathic ability cried out. The Orphu's cloud roiled, its pleasant scent turning sharp and ozonic with alarm. The lesser delegates, those without such senses, were bewildered for a moment, until they saw the object of all this terror. They saw Warlord Kalen. The mighty Vrax warrior, the conqueror of a dozen systems, had frozen mid-gesture. His hand, inches from Vance's chest, trembled. His snarling mandibles clicked shut. His multifaceted eyes, which had been burning with contempt, were now wide with a dawning, instinctual horror. He was seeing what the telepaths were feeling. He was seeing it in the human's eyes. Vance's eyes had not changed color or shape, but their expression had transformed into something that Kalen's ancient, hardwired instincts recognized on a level deeper than thought. It was a look he had seen only in the eyes of the deadliest alpha predators of his own homeworld, the ones that hunted even the Vrax. It was the look of a superior hunter. The human's eyes were not looking at a warlord. They were tracing the lines on his carapace, finding the seams. They were mapping the vulnerable joints in his limbs. They were estimating his weight, his speed, his momentum. They were looking at him not as a peer or a threat, but as a complex physics problem to be solved with a violent, final solution. Kalen, for the first time in his adult life, felt the gut-wrenching, blood-freezing terror of being prey. He saw, in that gaze, his own death. Quick, efficient, and utterly passionless, the warlord of the Vrax, a being who had never retreated from a foe, took a stumbling step back. Then another. He lowered his hand, a tremor running through his massive frame. He had come to intimidate a herbivore and found himself in a cage with a creature whose nature was so fundamentally predatory that his own warrior instincts screamed at him to flee. Silence. A silence more profound, more absolute than any the Grand Assembly Hall had ever known. 1,000 beings from 100 worlds held their collective breath, their universe irrevocably tilted on its axis. Then Vance blinked, just a simple physiological action. But in that blink, the abyss vanished. The cold, lethal hunter receded, and the mild-mannered diplomat returned. The mask of Elias Vance, ambassador of the Terran Systems Alliance, slid perfectly back into place. The surface of the lake was placid once more. He straightened the lapel of his simple, dark suit, a gesture so mundane it was surreal. He looked up at the terrified warlord, and then to the stunned High Counselor on the dais. His voice, when it came, was the same calm, measured tone as before, but now every syllable carried the weight of the abyss they had all just witnessed. "As I was saying, Warlord," Vance said politely, "you are not equipped to recognize the threats of my world. Humanity does not offer its strength in the form of carapace or claws. We offer it in our adaptability, in our resilience, and in our focus." He let the word hang in the silent air. Focus. They all understood what it meant now. It was the focus of the hunter on the hunted, the focus of the mind that had conquered a planet not with its fists, but with its terrifying, relentless intellect and will. High Counselor Xylus slowly lowered himself into his seat, his ethereal form seeming somehow smaller, more fragile. He looked at the human, this small, soft-skinned creature, and he finally understood the paradox of their signals. They were a species of poets and butchers, of philosophers and killers, because on their world you had to be both to survive. They had looked into the abyss of their own nature and the savagery of their planet, and they had not merely endured it. They had mastered it. They had civilized the monster in their hearts, but they had not killed it. They had put it on a leash, and Elias Vance had just shown the entire galaxy that he held the leash. The meeting was adjourned without a vote. The delegates fled the hall in a disorganized, panicked wave, desperate to discuss, to analyze, to comprehend the terrifying revelation. They didn't find a lost child to bring into the fold. They had knocked on the door of the galaxy's dark woods, and the thing that answered was the one all the other animals had been hiding from. Elias Vance remained alone on the great quartz floor, a solitary figure in the cavernous, silent hall. He had not raised his voice, not thrown a punch, not violated a single rule of diplomatic protocol, and yet he had just conquered the galaxy. The negotiations were over. A new, far more terrifying conversation was about to begin, not between a protector and a ward, but between equals. Or perhaps, Vance thought with a flicker of something ancient and cold behind his eyes, not equals at all. The balance of power had shifted, not through a display of force, but through a simple, undeniable Turing test of apex. The Confederation had failed.